It's a challenging time to be a teacher. We don't get paid a lot, the days can be long and exhausting, demands from students, parents, admins, and districts can be intense. There is always room for improvement and there is always more to do. There are always new procedures to learn, new programs to run, new strategies to master. But it's when our fire burns the lowest that we remember our purpose. We teach because we're resilient. We teach because we're problem solvers. We teach because investing in kids is one of the highest callings we can imagine. We teach because we know that the classroom can be a place of magic and possibility. We teach because we have an unquenchable fire for learning and a passion to share it. We teach because our colleagues are some of the best human beings we will ever meet. We teach because we have an opportunity to influence the global citizens that will make this world a better place. If you're still on fire for learning and growth, join the Teachers on Fire Roundtable for conversations that will warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your practice. You'll hear from real people and real educators with real solutions, not make-believe perfection, but ideas, inspiration, and a path toward change and transformation in K-12 education today. My name is Tim Cavey. I'm an 8th grade teacher, assistant principal, and the host of the Teachers on Fire podcast. I'm inviting you to join us at the Teachers on Fire Roundtable. Because you matter, your voice is important, and we are all better together. Good morning. Welcome back to another conversation that will warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. My name is Tim Cavey. I'm an 8th grade teacher, assistant principal, and the host of the Teachers on Fire podcast. I'm very excited to be joined today by two amazing authors, Grayson McKinney and Rondot, authors of The Expert Effect and active teachers, I might add. I've started getting into their book, and it is a joy, and I look forward to hearing more today. So, welcome here. If you are joining us, let us know where you are watching from. We'd love to hear from you and see you show up here in the chat and just acknowledge you and join you on your learning journey. But I'm going to throw it over to my guest today to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about their current context in education. So, Grayson, let's start with you.
Thank you so much for having us. Like you said, we are currently teaching. I'm a 5th grade teacher at the Costello Elementary School in Troy, Michigan. And this is my 14th year of teaching and my 8th year of teaching together with my co-author and friend, Rondot.
Yeah, my name's Rondot. I teach 4th grade, about 4 classrooms down the hall from Grayson, also in Troy, Michigan. We worked very closely together over the last 8 years. I've been teaching there for 8 years now, which is crazy every time I say it. We're just getting ready to wrap up another year here.
Well, I had the pleasure of hearing you on another podcast this week, and I can't wait to hear more about what that was like to join classrooms and take the wall down between the two of you and work together. I've been reading about it as well, so I've got lots of questions, and let's get into them. Just before we do that, though, I want to say hi to some viewers. Hello to Mr. Bradbury over on LinkedIn. And let's see, good morning to Tim Belmont on YouTube. And Brionna is saying hi from Michigan. Big fans of Grayson and Zach. Well, thanks for joining us, Brionna. Good to have you on board as well. And again, if you are watching us, let us know where you're coming from this morning. We'd love to say hello. So tell us about the mission behind The Expert Effect. Why did you write this book? And what's the fundamental message to educators? Zach?
Yeah, we truly believe that we're living in the midst of like an educational revolution right now. And we're passionate about making sure that school matches the future of this ever-changing world that we're living in. And this book is kind of like our voices and what we've been passionate about, we've been working on together, and just trying to make sure that school can be everything that it can be, it needs to be, and pushing it past that place of compliance. So this book is like kind of equal parts work of theory and then practice. We did not want to write a book. It really didn't start as theory, but it started with just examples from our classroom. We wanted to make sure that what we write about in this book is stuff that we're actually practicing and doing each and every day in our classroom.
I love that that mention of compliance, and I think I've come across that so far in your book as well, because it's so easy I mean, on the one hand, you feel like it's a no-brainer that school is about the learning, and yet we get sidetracked into compliance and measuring compliance in so many different ways. And so I think it's really helpful to bring us back to that focus. Well, I'm going to grab a few highlights from my reading so far. Okay, so here's a question, and I'll throw it up on the screen here. You write about the false dichotomy between school and the so-called real world. And I know Alice Keeler talks about that. She's in your neighborhood, I believe, as well. What can we say about this dichotomy, and how can we make the classroom a little bit more of the real world, or a lot more of the real world? Grayson, what can you say about that?
I was listening to one of your Spark podcast episodes not too long ago about passion projects and the amazing things that kids can come up with when we let them have their voice and choice over their learning. And so as you're speaking about, there are some things that naturally are enjoyable and that others that are more of a chore. And kids have those same natural inclinations, right? The desire to make a difference, the desire to have their voices be heard, the desire to have control over, what they learn or how they show their learning. And like you said, school for so long has been about, a couple of, words. It's easy to kind of like look back and say, wow, it's been about conformity, uniformity, standardization. We just finished up our end of year standardized testing, compliance. But is that what the real world of today really values? And I would say there's a big argument that says no. One of my favorite quotes from our book is that we need to stop teaching the YouTube generation for an assembly line world, right? Because there's so many things like that are going to be gone. Jobs that maybe the previous generation had, that are being replaced by automation or 3D printing or artificial intelligence. And so it's our job to prepare kids today to not only fill jobs, but actually create jobs in the future that go beyond the type of learning that, that compliant model of schooling was aimed at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, well said. I love that bit about, I think I highlighted that as well, and you might have it as sort of a standout quote in your book, that line about the YouTube generation. And it's so true. I mean, they've never known a world where you can't learn whatever you want on YouTube. Very different orientation from the world that we grew up in. Well, let's move on to number 4 here. What are some practical ideas and strategies that educators can use to increase learning from experts outside the classroom? So this is sort of the first of 3 major points that you make in your book about the expert effect. And I want to be careful because you're going to be a whole lot better at framing that than I will. But Zach, talk about this piece. And I found this really interesting. And I have some questions, not pushback, but just practical questions from the teacher side. But first of all, tell us about how we can start doing this, how we can bring in more experts. Zach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I remember when I was in school always thinking that my teacher was the smartest person in the entire world, and that teachers knew absolutely everything. And then I became a teacher and realized you do a lot of learning on the fly right before. But nowadays we have access to so much technology, so many organizations, especially in the pandemic. A lot of companies or organizations started doing virtual field trips, museums that couldn't have people in. But I think it gives us a permission that we don't have to be the number one expert on every content area that we teach. We can kind of be like someone who helps connect our students by reaching out to outside experts. So one example is that my students and Grayson's students, but we started doing student podcasting about 3 years ago. And I did not know, I wasn't a podcaster. I didn't have a podcast. I had the idea. I wanted to do it. However, I didn't know all of the things. So what did I do? I reached out to my favorite educational podcaster at the time, Kelly Croy, and he Skyped into my class, and he taught not only my students, he taught me at the same time all about podcasting. And that's just an opportunity that I couldn't provide for my students, not being a podcaster. So when we leverage our network and we use all of these outside resources, we can give our students these learning opportunities that otherwise are not possible. And so many people we've reached out to, even if they can't, they're gracious that we ask, but a lot of people are so happy to help kids connect with schools and do all of these things. Grayson is another really good example of when we were teaching entrepreneurship. Grayson, you want to talk about that one?
Yeah. So again, especially coming from the elementary perspective, where we teach all the subjects, we have to be the ones that teach math, science, social studies, reading, writing. And so we had this unit on entrepreneurship, and specifically looking at our economy in Michigan and thinking about, how do jobs go from idea to creation. And being teachers, we've started our own business. And so we reached out to, one of our favorite ed tech companies, the Flipgrid people over in Minnesota. Yes, Minnesota. Okay. And I said, like, hey, we're learning about entrepreneurship. Our kids are a big fan of the platform. We use it all the time. Would anybody from your organization be able to talk to us? And we actually got to talk with two of the creators of it, and they told us about how they had the idea and how they took it through all of these different iterations. And so our kids got to learn from not only people who had gone through that process, but people who they also looked up to and admired for their creation. And it was way more than what we could have ever given them just teaching out of our textbook.
You've kind of answered one of the questions I had, and I do want to take a moment to shout out our friend Fonz over at My EdTech Life. He says the power of connection is important. This models future-ready skills for students, and he's so right. And I know that's what you're getting at in your book. This idea of, hey, I'm not an expert in this space, but I'm going to bring in someone who is. And as you say in your book as well, an expert is anyone who knows more than you do, which is nice. It doesn't have to be, the top 5 authority in the world or anything. But where was I going with that? I know what I wanted to say. So one of the questions I had as a teacher is like, it can be, if I'm thinking about this, and I'll be honest and say I have not done a good job of this at all. I think about the time involved and, even finding these people and then reaching out and pitching the idea. And then they want to email back with clarification questions. And, it's a little bit overwhelming in terms of the time, but this can all become more efficient, right? If we start to build like a collection of go-to names and do some sharing between educators. So I was wondering if I'm sure you've started to do that even in your own district. And then the other piece too is, as you just mentioned, and I hadn't thought of this, all of the platforms that our kids are using, those creators or those owners should be very open to communicating with our kids. So I love that you reached out to Flipgrid, and I'm starting to think of other companies that, our school uses Seesaw, for example, and a number of others that really should be very, very happy to connect with our kids and share their learning. So can you speak to that? Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, we've connected with people at the Seesaw team as well in San Francisco. And like Zach said, the technology is there. We're using it. And they have, sometimes in some cases, they have dedicated people who are like really good at talking with kids. And that's kind of one of our criteria that we say, whenever you're looking for these outside experts to bring into your classroom, make sure that they're good at talking with kids and like they can speak at their level and they can make it engaging and fun. We reached out to another connection that we just made by bumping into this person at conference after conference. Todd Beard from Microsoft. He's been like integral with the education side and using Minecraft as like an educational simulation. And we have our class, your team teaching. Skype with him as well. So there's teams of people at these companies that are dedicated to talking with kids. But one tip I was going to give is it's always, it's good to shoot for the stars and like think big about who you could get your kids learning from. But it's also really important to start with your own classroom community, because for every student that you have, there's an entire network already built in, which is their family. Their parents who work at companies. They've got aunts and uncles who work at different organizations around the country. And when you're sending out your weekly newsletter or your daily updates and things like that, one really practical tip is just to say, hey, we're going to be learning about this topic in the next few weeks. If anybody has a connection to somebody in this industry or in this field, please let me know, because that totally increases the chances that they'd be willing to talk to your class, if they have a vested interest. And this has happened for us time and time again. We've got, in Michigan, we have a lot of auto engineering families. We've got, people who are involved in the design side of things and the vehicle testing side of things. And so we've got a lot of opportunities for that. I had a student once who had an aunt who worked at the Weather Channel in Georgia. And she took us on a virtual tour of the studio. We got to see how they use green screens and how they, use their computer, models to predict the weather and things like that. And so we're able to tie in those connections with the things that we're learning about. But the classroom community is a great place to start.
You mentioned on your conversation with Kelly Croy, you mentioned Tesla. One of you mentioned Tesla. Have you had a Tesla person come into the classroom?
We have not yet, but that would be awesome.
I will say though, my son is at a school. He's in 3rd grade, and in their school they had a family, somebody who worked like maybe in the dashboard design of Tesla. So he actually brought his car, opened the doors. The kids got to look inside. So yeah, they're not in our own classroom, but my son has had that experience.
That's very cool. Well, I would be a big fan for sure. No, I love that. And in my last school context, actually, I was in an entrepreneurship and marketing course, which is amazing. And we did something like that, actually, where we interviewed just parents and figures in our community. And you're right, there was a wealth of experience and knowledge just right there at our fingertips. So that's a great piece of advice, just to start with your own local community and regularly sort of proactively put out those invites and just say, hey, is there anyone who would like to speak to this? And, for, that hardworking realtor in your community, maybe they might have been intimidated about taking 2 hours out of their afternoon, but if they can just make a 20-minute Zoom visit, that might be a lot more accessible for them too. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Well, let's move on to my next question here, which is sort of related to where you're going with all of this, and you do focus on PBL to some extent. So let's talk about project-based learning. I know it's a huge topic, but let's narrow it down by asking this. What do you think educators need to know about project-based learning that maybe some are missing right now? Zach?
Yeah, so we find the importance of project-based learning to be so big because the world really is like moving towards this project-based world. When I talk to my friends who have jobs in other industries, a lot of them I'll ask them how work's going. They'll say, oh, I got assigned to a new project, or I'm starting a new project. And the professional world does not often just sit and do one thing over and over again each day, but it really is project-based. And we find that project-based with students, really, if we can tap into something that they really care about, it just makes it a more exciting process where they feel like they're discovering something and not just being told facts, memorizing facts, putting it on a multiple choice test, and moving on. So the project-based learning just pushes it further, makes it more exciting, more engaging, and deeper. One thing, people always ask, we've done a lot of presentations on project-based learning, and I think the biggest holdup that we've heard from teachers is teachers think that project-based learning is just like, let go of the wheel, let the students go, let them figure out. And that's not necessarily the case. Students can't do a project without that immersion phase. And in an immersion phase is reading from textbooks. It's doing short mini lessons and mini lectures, because you can't just send them off with no knowledge to create something. So I think, and at least in our conversations with people, a lot of their holdback is like, oh, well, I don't know how to start. Do I just let them go? But it really is going from being that like person up front on the stage all the time to being that guide and that facilitator of learning and just pushing them along. One other thing I'll say is, I think this happens a lot where we see projects on Twitter or on teacher Instagram or on websites that are like amazing. And we can both say, there are so many students that we've had and so many times where not all projects are these like genius models or perfect Instagram worthy models. But our thinking behind it is, did this student learn more by doing this project that maybe didn't turn out to their perfect criteria? Did they still learn more than if they would have taken a multiple choice test and read passages from textbooks? And we find the answer to that question is yes.
Well, those competencies of critical and creative thinking are really being pushed to a great extent, far more than the sit and get sort of model can ever generate, right? And the engagement has to be incredibly high for the most part. I mean, kids can always find ways to get off task, but I do teach in a middle school, but yeah, I mean, the engagement is quite high. I think. When I think about project-based learning, and there's another area that I'd like to do more of, a couple of things come into mind. So one is timetable challenges. So if you are sort of in a middle school model, as I am, that in terms of the timetable resembles high school a little bit in terms of kids always moving every 45 to 50 minutes. So that's one logistical challenge, because just pulling out the projects, getting going, and then packing it all up and putting it away, there's some time spent on those ends there. So you're not really left with too much in the middle. And then the other logistical challenge is our classrooms are so small. I feel like where do we keep these projects, So a couple of, do either of you, I don't know if you can speak to that or if anything comes to mind, but I guess I'm talking about the hands-on physical projects. There are many other projects that, could be done on Minecraft, for example, that wouldn't require the same space issues. But any other suggestions? You might not have any.
No, I was just thinking of something when you said space. It's like we like to give, a true project is not like telling students what the end result has to be.
Right.
So we've done many project cycles where there are some students that are creating a website, or they're creating an iMovie documentary, or they're creating something that's on their iPad, which, like you said, requires no physical storage. There's other kids, and these are some of the better ones that don't require technology sometimes, where we will find them out in the hallway with like 37 pencils being taped together to make like Warhammer props, and like, building a canoe to represent like Native Americans. So we like to leave it on the students of what is that end result going to be. And we find I'd probably say it's like 70% are like technology type projects, where others are building models, or they love, teaching 4th and 5th grade, writing scripts and doing plays in front of the classroom that represent a historical event. Those are the examples I'm thinking of right now. Grayson?
Yeah, one of the comments that just popped up on the bottom of the screen was what I was going to say, which is, it's so important to connect the different isolated classrooms. And I think he said, engaging your arts department is key. Yeah, exactly. So project-based learning is the vehicle by which we can break down the walls between the reading class and the writing class and the art department. Like, project-based learning is the thing that pulls all of these different disciplines together, because it's an opportunity for them to actually put all of these skills that they may have been practicing and learning in isolation all into one space. And if we could build the perfect school, or if we could like reimagine what that looks like, there would be a lot of there you go, run educator. There would be a lot more collaboration between teachers. And you kind of mentioned the time that Zach and I spent co-teaching with the removable wall, taken apart between our classrooms to make this like larger learning lab. And that's not always possible. But communicating with your librarian and communicating with your music teacher, because they can use their time as well, so that there is more time in the middle. I like that phrase that you used. The time in the middle where the students are hands-on and actually engaged in the learning. They get into the flow, right? Their state of flow. And the less we break that up, the better. Because school has been for too long like taught in these isolated boxes with teachers in silos. And if we're expecting students to work together and to collaborate, I think teachers need to do that as well.
Yeah, well said. Awesome stuff. So it's more work, but better teaching is more work. Bottom line, it's going to take a little bit more time, and it's going to be worth it as well when we can bring those different departments and disciplines together. So thank you, Mark, for those comments. I love that he is joining us from the UAE this morning or this evening for him. And he's definitely someone you need to connect with on Twitter. Well, moving right along, here's another great topic that energizes me as well. And I have some passions here too. Speak to this power of authentic audiences. Why does audience matter for students? And as I know you're going to talk about in a moment, we're talking here about how can students share their message, share their learning with audiences outside of the school building, right? Zach, can you speak to this?
Yeah, this is in our book. It's a 3-part system. This is the 3rd part, and I don't think it's any secret that this is our favorite part of the system, and this is where we really have had a lot of fun with it. So we break this up into 2 parts. There's audiences near to us. So that could be if your students are presenting a project. It could be as simple as inviting a class next door who've been working on the same project to be an audience. It could be inviting your principal in. It can be inviting superintendent or central office people who love an excuse to get out of their offices and into the classrooms and see the learning that's taking place. So it can start small with people within your educational community who can come in and see the projects. But where we really have found the magic to happen is when we can get students to have a global audience. And what we mean by that is how can we get students' work so it's not just turned into us for feedback, because that's what drives up the motivation. There's a quote we always share. It's one of my favorite quotes ever by Rushton and Hurley, and it goes something along the lines: if students are sharing their work with the teacher, they want it to be good enough. But if they're sharing the work with the world, they want it to be good. So if it's coming to us, they want it to be good enough to pass our standards. Whereas if they know their work is being viewed on a website, or it's being shared on Twitter, or it's a podcast that is listened to all around the world, like they really pick up on that. We called it selective perfectionism, where students who are not normally perfectionists, all of a sudden they want their work to be at that next level because, we have classroom podcasts. I'm like, well, this project, we're recording this, it's going on our classroom podcast, and I can show them on Anchor, our podcast has been listened to nearly 4,000 times in 34 different countries around the world. So that authentic audience piece is really what kind of takes that motivation up. And really, as we talked about, our students, when we ask them what they want to be, like, they want to be YouTubers, they want to be Twitch streamers, it kind of taps into that motivation. Instead of trying to fight against that, it taps into what they already enjoy doing. But at the same time, we don't want to there is an unhealthy culture that these kids are kind of growing up with how many likes can you get, how many views. So it's kind of walking a thin line there, if not like doing it in an unhealthy way.
Right. That was my brother just chipping in there saying views and comments are encouraging. So like you're saying, I mean, yes, it is encouraging. We don't want to make them too dependent on those metrics, but it is nice to know that people are actually listening, even within education for any content creator. I'm one of them, right, who puts up podcasts and blog posts and things like this. If no one is ever listening, that's not encouraging. Correct. So that's going to help motivate this creative process. Grayson, anything to add there on the power of authentic audiences?
I mean, it just when you stop and think, how does this apply to our own lives, right? If you're writing an email to your co-teacher, your neighbor next door, you might not have all the perfect capitalization, punctuation, but if we're writing a book, like how many times did we read over and over and over paragraphs? And I'm sure there are still typos, but when you know that it's going to be seen by somebody other than a close acquaintance. So for kids, that's their the classmates they've been with since kindergarten, or the teacher that they've seen since September. If they know that it's going on beyond the walls of your classroom, again, they want to make it ready for the world. So it's a natural motivation factor that we can tap into, and it makes a big difference. And like Zach said, you can start small, get with a buddy class, or get with another school in the same district, and like connect, through, throwing the stories that they've written up on a Padlet, or making recording a science report and putting it on Flipgrid and then sharing the link, or go bigger and have use StreamYard. This is a perfect example. Get your kids on StreamYard having a conversation. I just had 2 of my students join Jennifer Costa-Todd with her global student chat on StreamYard, and they were talking about online safety. And so that they're preparing, that they're practicing their public speaking, they're getting their poise. Everything changes when they know it's going to be viewed by a larger audience.
Just a funny moment yesterday from my 8th grade class. We were doing more passion project presentations, sort of finishing them off. And I had a student say, "Hey, Mr. Cavey, can you pause your camera?" And I said, why? And he said, because my parents will see this. So, so that doesn't really make our point, but I was just funny. I wanted to share that. And I will say I'm certainly not paid or incentivized by Seesaw in any way, but Seesaw does offer that opportunity of sharing the learning artifacts on the blog.
Yep.
That is then visible from, by, it can be viewed by classmates and by parents and people within that locked community. So it's sort of, Flipgrid is another way of doing it. There are many platforms and tools that allow that, but you don't necessarily have to make the jump all the way to the global audience right away. There are ways to keep it internal. I think another way too is for schools that use the Google domain, you can use Google Sites as well. And I keep thinking about this. I haven't actually used it, but I think those Google Sites can be locked down to views within the domain, for example, and things like that. So there are ways to go halfway for sure. Well, number 7 here, earlier in your book, you make a distinction between technology training and true professional learning. And I love that. I sort of smiled when I came across that. Do educators need to rethink how they use these terms? Just one more thing on that. I sort of dabble in TikTok from time to time, and there are some teachers doing really creative work over there, and including some ed tech experts, speaking of experts, who sort of lay out in 1 minute a demonstration of how you can do X, Y, and Z in your lessons or on Google Slides or whatever. And all of that is really helpful, but I think there's a danger. I've often thought about just calling that professional development, or saying I've heard people say we can get all of our professional development from TikTok or from these 1 minute videos. And that's a little bit different than the sort of deeper pedagogical, philosophical training that we need as well. So what do you think? Are we losing the plot a little bit when it comes to these terms, Zach?
Well, I think, like you said, there are times where technology training is necessary. Like we got a whole new LMS this year, and Grayson and I are the technology chairs of our building. So like we had to teach people how to do that. But at the beginning, Grayson and I have been presenting for about 7 years now together. And when we started, it was when our district first adapted one-to-one iPads. So our training was like 25 apps in 30 minutes that you can use next year. And it's like a run through of so much, where now we've kind of grown on this and come up with this idea, and presenting. And this book is really not about like 20 tools you can use. We do talk about the tools because that's important, but it's more like, what's the why behind why we're doing with this? And we always have to keep the why at the center of what we're doing, and not just using technology because it's shiny, when you have an observation and you pull up a new app, it can wow an administrator. But if it's not really linked to the why, or if it's just using technology for technology's sake, we all know as educators, we have a lack of time always. No one's ever been like, oh, I have too much time, so I'm going to use a few more apps. So we have to be strategic in how we're using these things and really think about how does it work with our curriculum and the why behind what we're trying to do.
Those of us that really enjoy technology have to be mindful of what you just said, I think, because just because an app is cool or a tool is flashy doesn't mean it is helping the learning. And as I said earlier, it always does come back to the learning. How is this helping our students engage and actually move their learning forward? So linking that with learning targets and thinking deeply about what a tool is doing is really, really important. We've got to keep it at the forefront. Another person who is from Ohio, I think, Jake Miller. I'm sure you've come across him. He's very good at sort of bringing that focus back to what is actually being achieved there. All right, so moving on to my next question. Describe your experience of team teaching. I alluded to this at the beginning. You two had the opportunity to sort of merge your two classrooms, and I was so fascinated by that story. So it included, as you wrote in your book, peer observation, feedback, and integration of best practices. Do you think we need more of this in our schools, Grayson?
I would say absolutely. While with a caveat that you can't just throw two random teachers together and expect like amazing things to happen. There does need to be like a team mentality rather than just like, just pairing people up for the sake of it. There's a quote by Ron Richart that like I always think back to, and he says, "For classrooms to be cultures of thinking for students, schools must be cultures of thinking for teachers. And I think the biggest hurdle that stops us from, moving that sentiment from being like a goal on a school improvement checklist to being the actual way that schools operate is time. But when we were co-teaching together, we had nothing but time. We were with each other every day, every lesson, and so in every planning period. So it was a constant process. And, when you're in your own classroom by yourself, there's just not as much opportunity for that. And some schools have got a good, good thing going where they have a schedule that allows for teachers to like pop in and observe and then like come back and, debrief about what they saw. But yeah, the co-teaching model, whether it's with, an English language teacher and then an English as a second language teacher, or a general education teacher and a special education teacher, or in our case, it was just two gen ed teachers with this mega classroom. There's a lot that you can learn from those experiences.
Zach, honesty time. Were there any moments of tension as you and Grayson started sharing spaces?
I don't think I'd say tension. There was just like, we both, as teachers, you don't realize how much you fall into a rut of like, well, this is how I do lunch count, and this is how we line up, and this is how we sit for morning meeting. And it's the things you don't even think about. Teachers make so many decisions on the fly every single day. So it was like we had to have like an hour-long discussion on how we were going to do lunch count. Like that's something neither of us would have even thought about. But ultimately, it was such a monumental shift, and being able to, maybe 3 times a year, you go into another person's classroom and watch them teach. We watched each other teach. Like he would teach math, I'd do writing. We'd watch it all day, every day. And we have a, great working relationship where we could give feedback and ask questions. And if Grayson was teaching math and I had something to add, a different strategy, and was great for students to see, because some students learn better one way, some learn the other way. So to be able to just give them 2 different perspectives, I think it really was kind of like a altering point in our careers, I think, and really a big part of why this book is written and published today.
Right. I would say that the biggest benefit for us was that it gave us the opportunity to take risks. That teachers, when you're the only adult in the classroom and you're like, okay, I'm going to try this new thing. I'm going to either try this new app or do this project-based learning. It can be scary because you're kind of like, there's no backup. You're like, if it fails, you go down in flames, right? Teachers on fire. I don't think that's what you're meant to. When you had another person, it kind of gave us it was like the buddy system. It's like, okay, well, we can, if this isn't going well, let's shift gears. And it was just an empowering experience, because I felt like we were able to take a lot more risks and try a lot of new things. And getting it was the first time our school had done that. It was inspired by a visit our principal did to a school in St. Louis, I believe, St. Louis area. And she came back and with all this literature about it and talking about these learning labs, and it just kind of inspired us. So we had to get our parents on board. We had to get central office on board. And the whole premise was this is going to be an innovative, kind of outside of the box experience. So it kind of gave us permission to try the new things that we, weren't necessarily experts in, but it got the ball rolling.
I think there is not enough of teachers seeing other teachers at work. And so I was just so inspired to read this. And my school building actually has some of this opportunity. We have those collapsible walls between classrooms. And so we can look at doing more of this. And I'm excited by the possibilities. Again, like I said, I think, and as you said so well, I think teachers, we sort of settle into our rut of what is comfortable. And then you have those light bulb moments when you see teachers do things differently. And it really is fun to sit in other classrooms. So thank you for sharing that. Oh, we lost Grayson. Hopefully we'll get him back here in a moment. Zach, as we start to wind up, there's Grayson. Okay. As we start to wind up, I thought I'd throw a sort of a surprise question at you. And it's this, who are the experts in your world? Who are some educators and authors who are inspiring you today? Zach?
Oh, there's so many. Well, we've made a lot of connections recently with our book being published through EduMatch and kind of opening up this whole new world of teacher authors that have been connected with on Twitter. Another one we've talked a little bit about is Kelly Croy has been a huge mentor to me a few years ago through his podcast. He had a contest for kind of like a coaching, and I entered and won the contest and talked to him for about 6 months every week. And that was just a huge, huge push for me. And then a lot of the big thought leaders like George Kiros on Twitter and Dave Burgess and all of those authors have really kind of molded us and pushed us.
All right. Well, shout out to all of the above. And I resonate with those names too. Just before I throw it to Grayson here, I don't want to miss Amanda on YouTube. Thank you for joining us. And Reba on LinkedIn. Great to see you as well. I hope you've enjoyed some of our conversation. So Grayson, I don't know if you caught all of it, but the question is, who are the experts who are inspiring you? Who are you reading and listening to these days?
So I've a couple of things are coming to mind. Two things that are coming up this summer. I'm always inspired by a woman named Jennifer Gottlieb, who at one time was our curriculum instruction, teaching and learning central office person. She's since moved to our county Oakland schools department, basically. But she's put together with her team this project, which they're calling the Oakland Youth Innovation Lab, and it's a 2-week summer institute that Zach and I are actually both going to be participating in as teachers. And it's basically this workshop. They're basically reimagining what school can look like. Students in grades 6 through 12 will have the chance to come to this summer school with an idea for a project that answers the question, how can we use our voice to build a more just society? And as the teachers, our job is going to be to connect them to experts at the right moment to get the skills or the knowledge they need to see their vision come to life. And they're going to leave at the end of the 2 weeks with a plan of how to make their project happen over the next several months. And then in January of 2022, they're going to showcase that to an authentic audience to show how it's gone. And every time I've worked with Jennifer Gottlieb, it's been a turning point for me. Just the resources that she brings and the professional development that she allows us to be a part of, it always makes me a better teacher. And then the other thing that we're taking part in this summer is a workshop happening in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, led by Mike Medvinsky and his team. They're going to be having Trevor McKenzie and Ron Richhart kind of come and be the guest experts. And it's a workshop all about inquiry. So I'm going to be reading Trevor McKenzie's book this summer. And, I always talk about Ron Richhart's The Power of Making Thinking Visible. So for us to be a part of that, we're presenting as well. It's just, I'm just blown away that we're actually shoulder to shoulder with some of these people doing the work that's going to move education forward.
Love Trevor, and shout out Trevor if you are listening or catching this at some point. That sounds like really good stuff. And Trevor, we need to chat about your latest book. I know Trevor's just published a third book on the assessment piece of inquiry, which is I think he's gotten a lot of questions about that over the years. So he's put pen to paper or keyboard to screen, I guess, one more time. And yeah, I am a big fan as well. Well, we are wrapping up, gentlemen. This has been a lot of fun, and I know we could go deeper on a lot of these topics, but what are the best ways for us to connect with you and continue to learn from you? And of course, pick up a copy of The Expert Effect. Go ahead and share your screen or let us know what are the best ways, what are the best places to find you, Zach?
Yeah, I'm active on Twitter. It's at Mr. Rondo, as it says under my name here. And then on Instagram, it's just at Zach Rondo. And then I have a blog that while writing this book, I definitely stopped writing on the blog as much. But hoping to pick that back up, and it's just zachrondo.com. It's the best way to connect with me.
That's awesome. And you mentioned how it appears under your name or under your image, I guess. But for our podcast listeners, it's MRRONDOT. Okay. So that's how you can find Zach on Twitter. And is it the same on Instagram, Zach?
Instagram is at Zach Rondo.
There we go. Okay. And because we don't want to forget our Instagram educators, right? Grayson, how can we connect with you?
Yeah, I'm very active on Twitter, and so my handle is displayed there. It's at gmckinney2, and we've also set up an Instagram account for our book, which is the same as the hashtag that you can share what experts you're connecting your students with, or when your students are teaching others as experts. It's hashtag ExpertEffectEDU, and so that's also the Instagram handle. And then I can try to share my screen unless you want to, Tim. Do you have the book pulled up?
I do. I can give it a shot here. Yeah, absolutely. So talk us through, I'll take us to the EduMatch page. And is there anything we should know about this page, Grayson?
So our book, The Expert Effect, is available on barnesandnoble.com, Amazon, and then our publisher, which is EduMatch, also has a Shopify. Yep, there you go. A Shopify page, and you can get it there. You can read some customer reviews, and and lots of other great books from EduMatch Publishing, which is an up-and-coming publisher out of Virginia, United States.
All right. Well, I know on behalf of any creator, author, podcaster, reviews are welcome. So I see one there from Ed William, and if you are reading, I've got to leave my review.
Thank you.
We'll leave that.
Yeah, appreciate it.
EduMatch and Amazon and all of those good places. Well, thank you so much again, gentlemen, for joining me today and inspiring educators to bring more of that expert effect into their practice. We will leave it there. I want to also thank our audience members for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Happy learning to you, and wherever you are in the school year, if you are winding up, I wish you well.
Thanks,
Take care, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks everyone who tuned in.